Because the story of October the 7th wasn't just about violence. It was about memory, about what gets remembered and what gets buried. And the Western media, through omission, distortion, and sheer damn cowardice. Take a close listen to some of the words they use. Israel doesn't attack Gaza, it responds to Hamas. The US doesn't invade Iraq, it liberates Iraqis. NATO never occupied Afghanistan, it intervened to build stability. And let's talk about interviews while we're at it, because the language isn't just in headlines, it's in the tone. When Western officials sit for interviews, the tone is deferential, respectful, collaborative. The questions are framed with built-in validation. How difficult has it been for your government to respond to this crisis? Can you walk us through your strategic goals? What message do you hope this sends to your adversaries? But when it's an Iranian diplomat, a Palestinian spokesperson, a black or brown leader from the global south, the tone shifts immediately.
Tonight, Israel's Iron Dome defense system intercepted a new volley of attacks from Iran.
8 people have been killed and dozens injured in the latest round of missile strikes launched by Iran.
Suddenly, it's an interrogation. Do you condemn Hamas? Are you saying Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself? Why haven't you held elections? Why are your people resorting to violence? And if they don't answer fast enough or say what the host wants to hear, the host interrupts, cuts them off, rolls their eyes, waves a finger, says things like, let's get real. I'm asking you a simple question. This is not a time for whataboutism. Just answer yes or no. The goal isn't not to understand, it's to corner, to frame, to force a confession. And then, of course, comes the inevitable moment where the host wraps up the interview and says, well, we have to leave it there. No, you don't have to leave it there. You choose to leave it there. You choose to give 5 uninterrupted minutes justifying airstrikes against civilians, against children. And then 30 seconds to a Palestinian father who lost 3 daughters and can barely get a sentence out before he's cut off. This is not accidental, it is systemic, it is deliberate. It is the language of empire, and it is how Western media doesn't just report in the world, it organizes it. Into good guys and into bad guys, into democracies and despots, into real nations and rogue regimes. And make no mistake, this language has real world consequences. Because once you've been labeled a terrorist, there is no diplomacy. Once your grief is called propaganda, there is no compassion. And then once your state is called regime, your people become expendable. And once your civilians are described as human shields, their deaths become acceptable losses. So the next time you read a headline or hear a Western anchor say Israel defend itself, Iran is escalating tensions, the US regrets the loss of life, ask yourself this: would those words be the same if the actors were reversed? Would the story be told the same way if the missile came from Tehran instead of from Tel Aviv? If the victims were white Europeans instead of brown Arabs? If the bomb was Russian instead of American? Because until we interrogate the language, we'll never understand the lies, and we'll keep confusing power with virtue. We'll keep confusing violence with security, propaganda with reporting, and empire with justice. Now let me ask you a painful question, and I ask it not to provoke, but to illuminate. When was the last time you saw a Palestinian child's name read out on CNN? Anyone? Not a number, not a body count, a name, a face, a story, a life remembered. Do you remember? When was the last time the BBC aired a dedicated segment for grieving mothers in Gaza? Not a 2-minute clip squeezed in between weather and Wimbledon. Not a both sides debate asking whether the bombing was justified. I mean a full-on special. The way they did, for example, after school shootings in America. The way they do when a single Israeli family is attacked, and the way they did after 9/11, after Paris, and after Brussels. When was the last time the New York Times put the obituary of a Gazan doctor or a poet or a school teacher on its front page? Because here's what I do remember. I remember Israeli victims getting full-page spreads. I remember their names, their professions, their dreams, even their favorite food. I remember headlines like, "She wanted to be a dancer, the life cut short by Hamas." And let me be absolutely clear, they deserve it. Every single victim of violence deserves dignity, deserves to be remembered. Every Israeli child killed in war deserves to be mourned. Every family torn apart by terrorism deserves the world's empathy. But empathy is not a finite resource, and journalism is not a eulogy machine for only one side of a conflict. When the media remembers only some victims and forgets the rest, it doesn't just fail to inform, it dehumanizes. Because when only one side gets to be human and the other is reduced to dust, data, and to debris, that's not coverage, it's complicity. When thousands of Palestinian children die and Western media can't even spare a graphic, for God's sake, let alone a name, that is a moral collapse dressed up as editorial judgment. They'll tell you it's too hard to verify, but they verified Israeli names within hours. They say Hamas operates in civilian areas. It's complicated. Is it complicated to say a 5-year-old was buried under concrete? They say we can't independently confirm casualty figures from Gaza, but they do omit to tell us that the Israeli government has not allowed any Western journalists into Gaza. They had no such issue confirming Ukrainian deaths when Russia bombed Mariupol, or quoting Syrian opposition numbers during Aleppo. So let's ask the real question then. Is it really about verification, or is it about validation? Because it seems some lives are born with press credentials and others with disclaimers. Here's what happens when the media dehumanizes an entire population. A Palestinian child is no longer a child, but a future threat. A Gazan mother is no longer a mourner, she's a suspect. A destroyed hospital isn't a war crime, it's a Hamas hideout. This isn't just semantic laziness. This is structural racism in real time, a moral hierarchy where Israeli grief is sacred and Palestinian grief is suspect, where Israeli trauma is human and Palestinian trauma is contextual, where one side gets obituaries and the other side, it gets buried silently. And so, when Western journalists wring their hands about objectivity and they lecture us on balance, when they scold the public for being too emotional, we must ask, objectivity for whom? Because it's not objectivity to remember one dead child's birthday and ignore another's name. It's not balance to air one mother's tears while silencing another's screams. And it's certainly not journalism to pretend all lives matter while only printing obituaries for some. Let's be brutally honest. This is not a media system that reflects humanity. It is a media system that filters humanity, that curates who gets to be innocent, that selects who gets to be remembered, that decides not by truth, but by allegiance, whose life counts. So the issue isn't just what stories are told, it's whose grief is considered newsworthy. Because once a people are erased from headlines, they are erased from memory. And once they're erased from memory, it becomes that much easier to erase them from the map. So the next time a Western anchor leans back in their plush studio chair, folds their arm and sighs that it's all too complicated, you ask them, complicated for whom? Is it complicated for the mother in Gaza who lost her children in a single airstrike, a whole family wiped out before her eyes? Is it complicated for the father in Rafah, digging through rubble with his bare hands, hoping to find a part of the body of their young child? Is it complicated for the medic in Khartoum, the hunger-striking prisoner in the West Bank, the Yemeni child on his 4th year of famine? No, it's not complicated. It's only complicated when justice threatens comfort, when the truth forces us to confront ugly alliances, when naming the oppressor means naming ourselves. That's when the fog rolls in. That's when both sides enter the chat. That's when we're told to wait, to pause, and to gather all the facts. But here's the thing. When white Western civilians are killed, no one waits for nuance. No one says, let's not rush to judgment. No one demands balance. Instead, we get wall-to-wall coverage. We get documentaries, hashtags, state funeral, days of mourning, flags lowered, empathy unleashed without apology. When the victims are brown, when they're Muslim, stateless, besieged, suddenly empathy becomes complicated. Suddenly death has to be interrogated. And suddenly context is used not to explain, but to deflect. So I'm going to go right ahead and call it for what it is. Nuance disappears when the dead don't look like you. And the next time a Western politician or pundit stands in front of a podium with solemn brows and scripted sorrow and invokes the sacred words, international law must be upheld, remind them that law has a color, that justice has a passport, that human rights come with a hierarchy. Because when international law was broken in Iraq, the media called it a mistake. When it was violated in Libya, they called it a humanitarian intervention. When civilians were slaughtered in Afghanistan, it was collateral damage. When Russia invaded Ukraine, suddenly every headline remembered the Geneva Convention. Suddenly, war crimes were back in vogue. Suddenly, every single analyst was citing Article 51 of the UN Charter. You see, the West doesn't abandon international law, it applies it selectively. When it's them, it's legal. When it's you, it's criminal. When it's NATO, it's enforcement. When it's the global South, it's aggression. Because truth in the hands of empire is not truth. It's just propaganda with a better wardrobe, polished, packaged, and presented in a British accent. This, all of it, isn't just about Gaza or Ukraine or Iran. This is about a global system that decides every single day whose pain is sacred and whose pain is strategic. A system that counts some corpses and forgets others, that turns grief into graphics, but only if it serves the right flag. that trains entire newsrooms to humanize one child's death and reduce another to a pixel on a map. And the question in the end is not, will the media ever tell the truth? Because the media isn't broken, it's functioning exactly as it was designed to. The real question is, when will we stop believing the lies? When will we stop mistaking spin for truth, silence for balance? When will we stop mistaking flags for facts? And when will we start demanding a media that doesn't just ask what happened, but to whom, why, and who profits from the silence? Because the truth is out there, buried under rubble, choked out of headlines, and muffled by talking points, but still breathing. Barely, but it's breathing. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we did listen to the truth. Even if it's not wearing a tie, or not backed by a Pentagon press release, and not trending on your timeline. Because if we don't, if we keep accepting sanitized violence, and if we keep watching the world burn and calling it breaking news, if we keep mistaking journalism for judgment, then we are not just misinformed, we are complicit. Well, thanks for watching, and if this helped you make sense of what's happening, give it a like, leave a comment or subscribe, and let's keep the conversation going, because this isn't just news, this is a warning. With that, good luck.